My sister tried to pin child support for someone else's child on me, but now I'm helping her husband avoid falling into the same trap. I'll start by honestly admitting that I hate my sister. Although it wasn't always this way, Nina is my older sister, and I loved her a lot when we were growing up. But over time, she showed me just how terrible she could be as a sister. You see, I was married to my ex-wife, Susie, for 2 years before discovering she had been cheating on me. I still vividly remember that moment. I was looking through her messages and stumbled upon a conversation where she had been sexting with her male best friend of 8 years. Susie had always assured me that he was just a friend, someone who had been in her life forever. Despite feeling jealous at times, I trusted her deeply. We had built our relationship on that trust. So when I accidentally saw those messages between them, I felt utterly betrayed. It was as if the foundation of everything I believed about our marriage crumbled in an instant. I confronted her, and she immediately broke down, apologizing profusely. She insisted it was a one-time mistake and that her friend meant nothing to her in that way. She promised to block him and assured me it would never happen again. Despite my anger and pain, I wanted to believe her. We started going to couples therapy because her betrayal had hurt me deeply, and I needed to understand why it happened and whether our marriage could be saved. In therapy, Susie seemed genuinely remorseful. She took responsibility for her actions and worked hard to regain my trust. For a while, I felt like we were making real progress. She was attentive, transparent, and willing to put in the effort to repair our relationship. I decided to stay and give our marriage another chance because I still loved her and wanted to believe that people could change and relationships could heal. However, as you've probably guessed, that was a huge mistake. After some time, I discovered that my ex-wife was secretly trying to meet up with her best friend. One evening, she told me she was going out with a coworker, but something about her behavior seemed off, and I had a gut feeling she was lying to me. Trusting my instincts, I decided to call the coworker after Susie left. To my dismay, they told me they had no such plans with Susie. I felt a wave of devastation and confusion wash over me. It was becoming painfully clear that Susie was probably seeing this guy, otherwise she had no reason to lie to me. I tried calling her several times, but she ignored every call. I felt a growing sense of dread and helplessness as the hours passed that night. Finally, she came home very late, completely drunk. I had been waiting for her all night, sitting on the couch in our living room, with my mind racing with emotions. When she walked through the door, she didn't even acknowledge me. She seemed completely intoxicated, stumbling past me on her way to the bedroom, acting as if I didn't exist. I sat there feeling invisible and completely heartbroken, realizing that the woman I once trusted and loved had become a stranger to me. Later, as I was about to go to bed, I heard her phone buzz on the nightstand with a message notification. Susie had fallen asleep fully dressed in her clothes from the night, clearly too drunk to even change. Carefully, I covered her with a blanket and leaned in to check the message she had received. As soon as I saw the number, I recognized it instantly. It was him, her friend. My heart sank as I read the text. "That was so much fun, we should do this more often." The message ended with a tongue and sweat drop emoji, which only made things worse. I felt a wave of nausea. There was no way a guy would send a message like that with those emojis if it didn't mean something significant had happened between them. My mind was flooded with all sorts of terrible thoughts about what they might have done. I felt sick, realizing my worst fears were probably true. I tried to calm myself, but it was impossible. The betrayal felt like a physical pain in my chest, and I couldn't get the image of them together out of my head. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I kept replaying everything over and over in my mind, wondering how we had gotten to this point and what I was supposed to do next. The night felt endless, and by the time morning came, I knew nothing would ever be the same. When I confronted Susie about that night and how she had lied to me, she did everything she could to avoid taking responsibility. At first, she tried to gaslight me, saying that my lack of trust was the real problem and that calling her coworker was an invasion of her privacy. She accused me of being paranoid and unreasonable. Her attempts to confuse me were frustrating and painful, but I refused to back down. I showed her the message he had sent, demanding an explanation. She downplayed it, insisting that's just how friends talk to each other, and called me weird for looking for something that wasn't there. I decided to play my last card. I told her I would confront him directly if she didn't tell me the truth. This threat seemed to affect her. She became visibly anxious and tried to dissuade me from contacting him, clearly worried about the consequences. Finally, after much resistance and reluctance, Susie broke down and confessed. She admitted that she had wanted to see him for a long time and that they had indeed kissed after getting drunk. She went on to justify her actions, suggesting that our marriage had become boring and that she was seeking excitement elsewhere. I vehemently disagreed, pointing out that her deceit and lying were the reasons our marriage had deteriorated. I reminded her that it was impossible to go back to normal after discovering she had been sexting another man. Despite her attempts to rationalize her behavior, I firmly held my ground. I made it clear that the responsibility rested entirely on her shoulders for breaking our vows and destroying the trust we had built. I expressed my deep disappointment and told her I had reached my limit. I couldn't just overlook her actions and pretend everything was okay. Susie, realizing the gravity of the situation, began pleading for forgiveness. She acknowledged her issues but begged me not to leave her, emphasizing that she was willing to work on herself and our relationship. Despite her promises, I realized the trust between us was irreparably shattered. The damage was too deep. Finally, I understood that staying would only prolong the inevitable. Her betrayal had created a rift we couldn't overcome, and our marriage was irreparably damaged. Realizing this, I had to make the hardest decision of my life by asking her to move out of my house. Fortunately, we had a prenuptial agreement, so I was relieved that it would protect me from any potential financial repercussions during our divorce. Despite her insistence and her attempts to involve her friends to persuade me to forgive her, I stood firm in my decision and finally kicked her out. I know this may sound harsh to read, but I was in so much pain. I had always thought we would grow old together. However, her betrayal left me shattered, and I knew I would never be the same again. I confessed to my parents and my older sister Nina what had happened between Susie and me. They were shocked and dismayed by the news, as no one had anticipated Susie's actions, and they assured me of their support during the divorce, which comforted me a bit. However, Nina seemed unusually quiet throughout all this, which I found strange. When I asked for her opinion, considering her close relationship with Susie during our marriage, she responded unexpectedly. Instead of acknowledging my feelings of betrayal caused by Susie's actions, Nina questioned whether I was sure I wanted to divorce Susie, pointing out that, unlike me, Susie did not have the support of her family. I was shocked by Nina's response. She seemed more concerned about Susie's well-being than the emotional torment I was going through. I firmly responded to Nina, saying that I didn't care about Susie's support system because she had chosen to repeatedly betray me with her infidelity. I emphasized that Susie's well-being was no longer my concern and questioned why Nina seemed more worried about my ex-wife than about me, her own brother. Nina defended herself, explaining that she was simply concerned about my well-being and didn't want me to make rash decisions about my marriage without thinking it through. She expressed how she had always believed Susie and I were meant for each other and was still in shock over our divorce. She wanted to know if I might regret it later. While I found her response strange at the time, I didn't dwell on it. After all, the entire situation was already emotionally draining, so I tried to focus more on getting through my divorce first. At first, everything seemed to be going well for me during the divorce proceedings, and my lawyer was confident we would win the case. But then, everything changed. Susie dropped a bombshell. She was pregnant. I was completely blindsided by this revelation. It was something I never expected. Clearly, life had other plans for me, and wanted to cause me even more pain. After this news, Susie and her lawyer urged me to halt the divorce proceedings. They argued that we should try to work things out for the sake of our child. Susie insisted she wanted to provide our child with a traditional family upbringing. I was stunned and immediately opposed the idea, stating that I didn't care about her wishes and that there was no way the child was mine. Susie argued passionately, emphasizing that she had never been intimate with anyone else but me. She insisted that just because she had kissed her best friend that night didn't mean she could have gotten pregnant by him. She kept urging me to consider what was best for our child and to fight for our marriage for the sake of the baby. However, I refused to be swayed. I knew it was a desperate attempt to derail the divorce process and try to make me stay with her so she could continue living an easy life off my money. To me, it was clear that Susie was grasping at straws, and I remained steadfast in my decision to end the marriage. I stood firm, insisting that the divorce would proceed as planned. I said that after Susie gave birth, I would arrange for a paternity test to determine if the child was mine. However, Susie's lawyer countered our argument, claiming that since Susie was still legally married to me and had declared that she hadn't been intimate with anyone else, I was automatically considered the child's father. They stated they would seek child support from me because of this. My lawyer disagreed, pointing out that without a paternity test, such claims were baseless. Unfortunately, we were aware of the shortcomings in our legal system, especially when it came to protecting men in situations like this. In the weeks that followed, Susie's lawyer proceeded to sue me for child support, presenting evidence to back up their claim that Susie hadn't been intimate with anyone else. They portrayed me as a controlling figure, trying to evade responsibility for my actions and avoid paying child support. They even brought in witnesses to testify on Susie's behalf. To my surprise, one of the witnesses was my older sister, Nina. I had no idea she would be there. Initially, I assumed she was there just to observe and support me, but to my dismay, she testified against me. claiming that she had been friends with Susie for a long time and was certain Susie couldn't have truly betrayed me by sleeping with someone else. According to my sister, Susie was still in love with me. Hearing my own sister support my ex-wife over me was heartbreaking. Nina knew firsthand how much I had loved Susie and how deeply she had hurt me, yet there she was, supporting Susie's deceitful actions. Later, outside the court, I confronted my sister about her testimony. However, Nina defended her decision, insisting that she was doing what she believed was right and that I would eventually appreciate her stance in the future. I raised my voice, expressing my disgust and anger toward her for putting me in a situation where I could be forced to pay child support for a child whose paternity wasn't even confirmed. Nina argued back, saying I shouldn't be so cruel to an unborn child and that I needed to consider the financial hardship Susie would face if she didn't receive any form of child support from me. Nina told me I would never understand her perspective because I didn't possess maternal instincts as women do. She urged me to realize that providing for the child's expenses was the least I could do in this situation. I felt exploited and deeply disturbed by my sister's perspective on the matter. I couldn't comprehend how she could prioritize Susie's financial needs over the emotional torment I was experiencing. My parents also expressed their disappointment toward my sister, telling Nina she had no right to act behind my back and testify against me. However, the damage was already done. Since my own sister testified against me, it demonstrated to the court that Susie might be telling the truth and that I was trying to evade responsibility for our child. As a result, the court ruled in favor of my ex-wife, awarding her child support for the child until they turned 18. I was filled with rage and refused to accept the ruling. But despite our efforts, my lawyer and I found ourselves ignored and unable to change the court's decision. It's been quite some time since my divorce from Susie, and I've continued to pay child support for her child every month, who clearly looks nothing like me. Even though I've conducted a paternity test that confirms the child isn't mine, the fact remains that because my ex-wife was pregnant while we were still married, the child is legally my responsibility. Now I'm forced to keep paying until the child turns 18. This is why, throughout this torment, my resentment toward my sister has grown more than toward my ex-wife. I solely blame Nina for having trapped me in this situation. That's why I've maintained complete silence toward my sister and refused to acknowledge her presence at any events, despite multiple pleas from my parents to forgive her and let the matter go. Everyone else in the family respects and understands my stance. Several cousins and relatives share my disdain for Nina and have consequently kept their distance from her. Nina, on several occasions, has complained to our parents about how I've isolated her from the rest of the family. She justifies her actions by claiming she did what she thought was best for the child. However, her attempts to gain sympathy have fallen on deaf ears, as the rest of the family recognizes her recklessness and supports my decision. Nina got married last year to her longtime boyfriend, Joshua. Despite receiving an invitation to the wedding, I chose not to attend. Later, I learned from my parents that many other family members also didn't attend, which disappointed Nina. After getting married, she and her husband tried for a while to have a baby. My parents expressed their excitement to me at the prospect of finally having a grandchild from our bloodline. Recently, I had to travel to a nearby city for a work conference organized by my company. After the conference ended, my colleagues and I decided to relax at the hotel bar during our free time. Imagine my surprise when I saw my sister sitting with an older man at the bar. She hadn't seen me, and I made sure it stayed that way, as I was intrigued to see her in a bar late at night out of town, considering that she's married. I watched as she leaned in close to the older man and whispered something in his ear that made him laugh. My suspicions grew as they appeared to flirt and seemed unusually comfortable with each other. Without much thought, I instinctively took out my phone and quietly took some photos. I made sure to capture clear images of my sister's face and the older man's face, wanting irrefutable proof of what I was witnessing. I watched in disbelief as Nina and the man continued their intimate conversation, sharing smiles and laughter. After about an hour, the man gestured for Nina to follow him to his room, and she nodded and got up to accompany him. My eyes widened as the reality of the situation became clear. I was clearly witnessing my sister about to cheat on her husband. I wanted to shout at her to stop, but from past experience, I've learned that cheaters never learn from their mistakes. Instead, they need to be taught a lesson. After returning home, I decided to contact her husband, Joshua, directly. I felt it was important for him to know the truth rather than be blindsided like I was. I found him on Facebook and sent him a friend request, hoping he would accept it. A few hours later, I checked and saw that he had accepted my request, so I immediately messaged him. In the message, I introduced myself as Nina's brother and explained that we needed to have an important conversation. I asked him not to inform my sister about my message and provided my phone number so he could call me. I hoped he would listen to what I had to say and waited anxiously for his call. A few minutes later, he called me, curious to know why I had reached out to him. He mentioned that he already knew of me from Nina and my parents, but was surprised I had contacted him after all this time. He then asked what was wrong, and I sincerely shared what I had seen at the hotel between Nina and the older man. I refrained from immediately using the word cheating, as I wasn't entirely sure if Nina and he had an open marriage or not, so I didn't want to assume. However, as I detailed the events to Joshua, he started asking numerous questions about what Nina was wearing and who the other man was. I mentioned that I had even taken pictures of her with the gentleman, as it was hard to believe otherwise. It was clear he was deeply affected by the revelation of Nina's infidelity. After a brief pause, he unexpectedly expressed gratitude for my honesty and asked why I had bothered to help him, especially considering that we were essentially strangers and I no longer had a relationship with Nina. His question struck a chord and led me to share my own experience, explaining how I had been in his position when my ex-wife cheated on me. As I delved into the details, I explained how Nina had compounded my pain by testifying against me, leading to my current burden of paying child support for a child that wasn't even mine. Joshua was silent for a few minutes after hearing my story. He then revealed that Nina had presented a completely different version of the truth. According to her, my marriage to Susie was already failing, and we had stopped being intimate, which led Susie to make a one-time mistake that supposedly led to our divorce. I was enraged upon hearing this distortion of reality and clarified to Joshua that Susie had, in fact, cheated on me twice, making it clear that our divorce wasn't just because of a single mistake, but because she had repeatedly broken my trust with her friend. To my relief, Joshua believed me. He informed me that he also had no intention of staying with a cheating partner and would confront Nina about it. In the following days, my parents repeatedly called me, accusing me of ruining Nina's life, as she was now facing a divorce. They blamed me for unnecessarily interfering in her marriage and expressed their frustration about not being able to have a grandchild from her. After this, I didn't hold back in the discussion either. I countered their accusations, stating that it wasn't my fault their daughter couldn't stay faithful in her marriage. I emphasized that instead of obsessing over the idea of a grandchild, they should focus on teaching their daughter better values and morals so she could become a better person. Nina also sent me a vile text, accusing me of being a spiteful child who couldn't stay out of other people's affairs. She even insinuated that Susie's infidelity during my marriage was somehow justified and that I deserved everything that had happened to me. Her message left me fuming, and it took me hours to calm down after reading her words. However, fate seems to have its way of balancing things, because I recently learned that Nina is apparently pregnant. She claims that Joshua is the father, but he refuses to take any responsibility. Joshua has reached out to me, asking me to testify on his behalf when the matter inevitably goes to court. As I was the one who took those incriminating photos of Nina with the other man, I agreed without hesitation, not only to seek justice against my sister, but also out of empathy for Joshua. I don't want another man to experience the pain and betrayal I went through with my ex-wife. Since then, my parents and Nina have been relentlessly pressuring me not to testify on Joshua's behalf. They keep emphasizing that family comes above all else. I can't help but find their messages ironic, considering that Nina didn't prioritize family when it came to me. Am I right in teaching my sister a lesson and ensuring her husband doesn't suffer the same fate as I did? Update 1. I'm shocked to see how polarized the reactions to my post are. I can't believe there are some women under my post trying to convince me to support my sister despite her clearly cheating. I just want to tell them, shame on them. Believe me, I would have absolutely no problem if my ex-wife had requested child support after proving to me that the child was mine. However, she didn't do that. Clearly, she knew the child wasn't mine, as we weren't even intimate at the time. Therefore, she consciously forced me to take responsibility for him because she couldn't afford it on her own. I couldn't prove she had been intimate with that other guy because there was no evidence apart from that single message I found. So, I hate my sister Nina for harming me and testifying in favor of my ex-wife. However, now that Nina is similarly manipulating her husband, I won't stand by idly. I'm going to testify against her and make sure Joshua doesn't face the same fate in the future. If it turns out the child belongs to Joshua after it's born, I'm sure he won't have any issues taking responsibility as he seems like a good guy. But until that is proven, why should a husband be forced to pay child support when his wife has clearly been with other men? Nina has shown absolutely no remorse for her affair, nor for being the cause of her marriage's failure, unlike my situation. Joshua and Nina don't even have a prenuptial agreement, which means there's a chance he might have to pay her alimony. Therefore, I believe that in addition to this, he shouldn't be forced to pay child support for a child that isn't his. I think I'm doing the right thing, and I'm glad that the vast majority of comments under my post agree with my decision. Update 2. It's been a while since I last updated. Today I provided testimony against my sister in court. I narrated everything I witnessed her doing with the older man, presenting all the evidence and photos. I felt my sister's angry gaze fixed on me the entire time, but I stood firm. Despite her lawyer's attempts to dismiss my testimony by claiming I held a grudge against my sister, the judge validated its truthfulness. I hope my testimony has a positive impact on Joshua's case, and that he isn't forced to pay child support. However, the outcome remains to be seen. Amidst everything that's been happening, my relationship with my parents has taken a hit. My mom called me, her voice choked with tears, after learning I kept my promise to testify against my sister. She was clearly disappointed, telling me how she and Dad had hoped I wouldn't do such a thing against my sister. As I listened to her, I couldn't help but feel a wave of frustration. I reminded her how they had never fought for me with the same intensity when my sister did the same to me during my divorce. They had even forgiven her for everything. Yet here she was, calling me a disappointment and crying as if my struggles and burdens were nothing compared to my sister's. I went on to tell my mom that it was unfair to reprimand me for standing up for what's right and telling the truth, especially when they hadn't supported me in the past. It felt like betrayal, and I made it clear that I didn't need them in my life if they were going to prioritize my cheating sister over me in this way. Since then, I've stopped talking to my parents and refused to answer their calls or respond to their messages. Update 3. I'm back with an update about my sister's situation. I'm pleased to report that Joshua has been cleared of paying any child support to my sister. I'm sure Nina is very upset. I can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, knowing that at least one person was able to avoid the unjust burden that so many others, myself included, have had to bear. I'd like to clarify a few more things for the last time since people keep asking under my post. No, I don't have a relationship with Susie's child, even though I'm still paying child support. If one day the child approaches me when they're grown, I won't hesitate to tell them the truth about their mother. Yes, my parents and I are still not speaking, and honestly, I've been feeling much lighter and more relaxed, without them calling me every other day accusing me of not supporting my sister. Nina won't dare face me because I'm sure she's still embarrassed after I testified against her. Also, yes, she will receive alimony from Joshua, which we already knew was going to happen. No, my parents don't have a relationship with Susie's child because they know the child isn't mine. I have no idea if they'll accept Nina's child, but maybe they will. That's all for now. Update 4. I don't have updates on Nina because it's been 2 weeks since my last post, and I haven't spoken to anyone, but I do have some answers for you. To start, many people are asking why I didn't request to stop paying child support when it was proven the baby wasn't mine. I know many of you are used to living in countries with more normal laws, like the United States, but here, once your name is on a birth certificate, it's very hard to remove it. I've certainly discussed it with my lawyer, but it could cost a lot of money. And even then, there's no guarantee I'd stop paying. That is, there's a high chance I'd still be paying while incurring significant legal expenses. Where I live, the law seeks to protect the baby, which is why it tries to assign a father to take responsibility, as it's a very conservative country. Even Joshua has to pay my sister because she wasn't working during the marriage, even after it was proven she was unfaithful, but at least not for her child. As for my parents, I haven't been speaking to them either since I've blocked them, so that's fine. Update 5. I have news about Nina, thanks to a relative who visited me a few days ago, and as expected, she's very angry with me. She says that since I can't be a good father to my child, I can't side with a mother. I'd like to call her and remind her that it's not my child and that she was unfaithful, but there's no point because she already knows this and continues with the farce. But the interesting part isn't that. It's the fact that she has gone after child support from the real father, who wasn't the older man I saw at the hotel but another man she was also sleeping with. Or at least that's what she thinks because, according to her, he's the one she was most frequently intimate with. Anyway, they have to wait for the child to be born to do a DNA test, as the judge currently doesn't have any man to tie to a child that isn't his. I wish people here voted better so we could have politicians who passed laws that worked and avoided all this. I'm even waiting to see if I have any chance in my case.